I do have some good news for you. Not a lot, but I've got some. This reminds me of my home near where I live. This is on Vancouver Island. It's a sculpture carved from one solid piece of marble from northern Vancouver Island, and obviously it's a beautiful figure. It's called Spirit of Earth, and it's very much in the tradition of the First Nations, the indigenous peoples in our region, and their respect and reverence for Mother Earth. In Canada, as in the United States, the indigenous people are really wonderful. They're really leading, they're out there in the street leading the opposition to the monster of the fossil fuel industry. So we respect them a lot for doing that. Okay, so this is my title. It's funny, Real Truth Conference, because for some years now I've been referring to global climate disruption as the terrible truth. And I've been trying to communicate the terrible truth as best I can on websites. I got several websites, and also on my papers. So that's one of my websites, and I manage that. That's the Climate Emergency Institute. It's a bit busy. I'll be putting the presentation on the website. I use the websites pretty well as my sort of reference library. But you'll see I'm featuring the IPCC, that's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, their October 2018 1.5 degrees C report, which I was an expert reviewer of. Now, this is definitely the best of the IPCC reports. Their first report was way back in 1990, and this was very good because it received a lot of publicity from the media. It seemed that the IPCC finally got the truth of climate change across to the public, across to the media. So there's the book. I co-wrote the book with Elizabeth Woodworth. She's a lady about my same vintage. And we wrote the book for a couple of reasons, I guess. One was that we became aware that although there were professors and people working on the criminal moral aspect of climate change, because it's an atrocious moral insult, but we couldn't find a book on it. So we decided, okay, we should write a book. The other thing was we were both very aware one of the very good things that is happening with respect to climate disruption, and that is the young people coming to the fore and actually taking legal actions against the fossil fuel monster. So in the United States, we have our Children's Trust, and they're suing the federal government under the public trust doctrine for not looking after their climate, their environment. They're actually, as I'll show you, they're leaving the planet in one heck of a state for these children, which is really a terrible thing. So our Children's Trust is being so far very successful in the United States, but the Trump administration keeps on and on and on, sending more and more demands for information. So they need all the help that we can give them. So that's our Children's Trust in the States. The other really good group in the States that's having a lot of success is called the Climate Mobilization. And they're doing a city-by-city climate emergency project. In 2001, I think it was, I heard Bill McDonough speak. He was at a conference that David Suzuki was at, and some other people. David Suzuki's a famous Canadian doing a TV show, one of the most successful TV shows on nature. So Bill McDonough, who is an architect and a green architect, he started his his talk with this question. And the question is, how do we love all the children of all the species for all time? And as the years have gone by, I think I've become able to understand that question more and more and more and more. So the other question now is, can we rescue the future? Yeah, we've got to literally save the planet. But that's people and other animals and the birds and the fish. Can we rescue the future? This is a 15-year-old young lady who has had a good amount of good publicity recently. She's called Greta Thunberg, and she's from Sweden. And she's the young lady that started the strike at her school, because she was wanting to get her message out that Sweden was not looking after her atmosphere, her environment well enough. Now that's interesting, because Sweden is really at the lead. It's certainly one of the best countries with respect to their target, their emissions targets. But Greta's quite right. It's nothing like good enough. None of the industrialized nations, they all have these emissions targets that they file with the United Nations. And none of them have a target which is even close to the old, now abandoned, 2 degrees C limit, let alone close to the 1.5 degrees C limit. Just a quick mention that for years and years and years, we've had this 2 degrees C global warming limit, which is pretty well for a long time. It's been realized by many people that it's a limit for catastrophe. So it's very good that the IPCC, that's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and the scientists have come solidly behind the 1.5 degrees C limit. So that's really, really important. We now have a limit which is potentially a survivable limit. So there she is at what's called COP24. Ever since 1990, there has been an annual United Nations climate conference. And here we are last December, in Poland, we had the 24th, and people talked and talked and talked, and documents went round and round and round. And as usual in these conferences, nothing got decided. That's Greta at the, I think probably just a week ago, at the World Economic Forum. Watch one of her YouTubes. She is absolutely amazing. She knows how to tell the truth very directly, very quickly. And we're probably going to see a lot more young people like Greta. That's what my guess is. At the COP24, you may have read that a bad, thoroughly bad thing happened. The 1.5 degrees C report by the IPCC, the IPCC does the reports, and then they routinely go to the United Nations next climate conference, and they form the scientific basis of that conference. This has been going on since 1990. At COP24, the arrangers of the conference went through the formalities of tabling the 1.5 degrees C conference, and it was blocked by a group of countries. It was blocked by Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Russia, and of course now the United States. And this really was terribly annoying, to put it mildly. It ruined the conference, which of course is what these countries wanted to happen. And but the good thing was that the media picked up on it. So we're not making very much progress with regards to these cumbersome ways in which we do things. Now here's something very, very good from the United Nations. You may remember our last Secretary General was Ban Ki-moon, and he was a star on climate change. He really, really was great. So when his time was up and I heard he was going to be replaced by somebody, I thought, oh my gosh, I hope he's as good as Ban Ki-moon on climate. So this is Antonio Guterres, who's luckily he's our present UN Secretary General, and he's just great. He gets climate change. So in May, he made this statement that it was an Austria World Summit that he made the statement that climate change is an existential threat, meaning it's a threat to our survival, and that's to most life on the planet, and there's no question about that. I'll be talking about that, including and especially humankind. And then he went on to talk about the great renewable energy which is coming online, but pointing out that in order to survive climate disruption, we have to end the age of fossil fuels. It's not enough to bring on all of this wonderful renewable energy. That has to replace the fossil fuel energy. One of the things that I became interested in very early on climate disruption was food security, or rather food insecurity, as it is now. The focus on climate change has been very much on sea level rise, and that's certainly understandable. But long before we have our cities having to be moved, long before we're going to suffer disastrous impacts, they've started already, on our crop yields. So that's another website that I have on climate change and food security. Now, so here's my wish. I sort of thought, okay, put this together last night. If I had one wish, what would I do? So I thought, you know what I'd like to do? I'd like to represent Mother Earth, Greta, and all the children in the world, our children of trust. I'd like to represent them in a case of unprecedented ever crime and the greatest evil ever of annihilation by fracking, because these people and corporations are fracking our planet to death. And I'd like to bring the case against the multinational investment banks who are financing the fracking. Exxon gets financed 80% with its fracking operations, against the multinational fossil fuel corporations who are fracking our planet to death, of course. Also, I'd like to bring it against governments that are still subsidizing fossil fuel corporations. And you'd never believe it, but over the past couple of years, that's increased again, and it amounts to trillions of dollars. So that's a terrible and great evil, obviously. And of course, I'd like to bring it against the politicians who are enabling the fracking, who are really representing the fossil fuel corporations. They're not representing the people at all. They're certainly not representing the children. They're certainly not representing the future. So that's just a dream. So we do have some climate change good news, and this is it. In 2019 is going to be the year of the vegan. And this was published no less than in The Economist. So yes, in one of the two main aspects of climate disruption, we really are making great, great, great progress. So here's Antonio Guterres again, and he spoke in September at the United Nations, and he warned again of the direct existential threat of global climate disruption, and said that the climate is nearing the point of no return. And that is unquestionably true. Of course, the UN Director General gets briefed by the best scientists, but I'm well aware of the fact that what he says is the truth. Now, last night I checked the NOAA site, the National Ocean and Atmospheric Administration site, and I was pleased to see that it was up again, because all the sites that I use have been down. They've been closed because the United States government has not been operating. So, hey, we got a government here again. That's nice. We have now hit 410 parts per million, which is, to me, just hard to believe. It just seemed like yesterday that it was 410 parts per million, 350 parts per million right along the near the bottom there is the safe level. And as you can see, this is carbon dioxide concentration from 1970. You can see unquestionably it's accelerating. This is the other big one. This is methane. Methane is very important, particularly because of the livestock meat industry, which is the big source, or one of the biggest sources of methane. Not the only one. Growing rice is actually another source of methane under global warming, because rice is grown in an artificial wetland, and with global warming, those artificial wetlands growing the rice are emitting more methane. So the 800,000-year limit of these greenhouse gases, we know from the ice core. The 800,000-year limit for CO2 was 300 parts per million. It's now at 410. On methane, the limit of 1 million years is 800 parts per million. It's now 1,870 parts per million. This, my friends, is climate insanity. And this is going up extremely rapidly. So that's a little bit of the academic stuff. And yes, the issue today is the survival of humanity and most of life. That's what it is. This is a conference put on by the Hampshire College in 2014 for Earth Day. Now, global climate disruption is seldom linked to other things, the way that the science approaches it. This is coming on top of already the 6th mass extinction of life in our world. And that mass extinction is accelerating, and that's due to our industrial world and corruption and lack of international law and regulations. You know, I picked out my book, the classic by Richard Leakey, called The Sixth Extinction, and I was horrified to realize he wrote it in 1996. So one of the things I'm going to be pointing out in this presentation is how long those who are responsible for governing us and looking after us and our planet, how long they have known that we were headed for a cataclysm. So the 6th extinction was established in 1996. The team at Stanford did the definitive research, which was published 2 years ago. And their title was The Biological Annihilation. This is a scientific paper. The Biological Annihilation Assessed by Vertebrate Species. And so the reason, of course, main reason for the 6th mass extinction is that we have, you're going to hear me say accelerating a lot. We have accelerating tropical forest destruction. So we're losing the tropical forests everywhere. And because the biodiversity, the life is so rich there, this is the 6th mass extinction. But the research finds that we are losing life and species everywhere, in all bioregions. It's not just the tropical forests, bad enough though that is. It's also the coastal and the wetlands all over the world. I decided to talk a little bit about something that I don't normally go into, but there's some very recent research on this, and it's nothing if not interesting. This is the end Permian mass extinction, the time when Earth nearly died, and it was a long, long time ago, 250 million years ago. So one has to be rather careful not to make parallels with today's situation with something so long ago. But the scientists have actually made that link now. And here's a headline, global warming mirrors Earth's largest extinction ever. Climate change was behind Earth's largest extinction. We're on the same path as the world's biggest extinction, and this is the University of Washington. And the end Permian went over a long time, and we lost on this planet, life lost, 99% of all marine species and 70% of terrestrial species. It was an extinction that started in the oceans and then spreads to the land. Us on the land, the oceans don't need us, but we on the land need the oceans for our survival. The marine scientists are always like reminding us about that. Actually, this same research, University of Washington, they weren't the only team to come to this conclusion. A Chinese-led team here came to the same conclusion, that it was a catastrophic impact on the oceans that started things off. And they say it was happened in a geological instant of 30,000 years. Well, that seems to be a long time to me. The scientists who revealed the cause of the great dying mass extinction called for action to halt climate change. I hope we're going to see a lot more of this. I hope that the scientists like Dr. James Hansen are going to come out of their offices and talk to the media and tell everybody what this emergency is. We really need that. So they've said that we've really got to respond immediately because of the similarities between this Permian mass extinction and what industrial civilization is doing with its pollution today. The ocean temperature rose 10 degrees C in the Permian mass extinction, which is a lot. So this scientific discussion on the Permian has been going on for a long time, but the scientists have now come together and they know what caused it. It was started by CO2 emissions from these volcanoes in Siberia. That led to ocean warming, ocean heating. That led to ocean deoxygenation, and at the same time, the oceans were being acidified. Sound familiar? CO2 emissions, ocean warming, ocean acidification. Yeah. So these same things are happening today. As I say, the Permian was a long, long time ago. The levels that are happening today are way lower than they were at the Permian, but all of these levels are accelerating. This is a presentation that I prepared for the European Geoscience Union conference last year, and it's pretty dramatic now that I can put all of these data sets together, and people just have to look at them and they can see it. Everything's accelerating. The things that are going down are accelerating as well as things going up. In addition to that, in addition to the fact that all of those data sets are accelerating, we have feedback emissions. And feedback carbon emissions are beginning to kick in, and that's putting more carbon into the atmosphere. And the amount of carbon that could be put into the atmosphere by these feedbacks, which are caused by global warming, is ginormous. This is the permafrost feedback, and permafrost, the scientists have now discovered, contains twice as much carbon as all the carbon in the atmosphere. And therefore, Antonio Guterres in September of this year said this: if we do not change course by 2020, we risk missing the point where we can avoid climate change runaway, with disastrous consequences for people and all the natural systems that sustain us. Now, 2020, this has been around. Everybody's in the field of climate change has known about this since the 2014 Fifth Assessment, which made it very clear that 2020 was the absolute limit to the time when global emissions had to be put into decline. That can be done very, very easily. All that has to happen is for the governments to stop subsidizing fossil fuels and killing our future. That's really all that has to happen. The power of the market is such that we're getting lots of investment, investment on a par with fossil fuel energy, with renewable energy. So you can imagine that that would pretty well solve the problem. Yes, we should be taxing carbon, putting a price on carbon, obviously. In actual fact, this goes back to the 2007 fourth assessment report that said to avoid 2 degrees C, and all the scientists, I remember very well, were very definite about this. We had to reverse our increasing emissions by 2015 to 2020. So we're there. We're on the last year now. We really are on the last year. And so I mentioned the acceleration and I mentioned the feedback emissions that are kicking in. There are many huge sources. This is something that I present on a lot. There are many huge sources of feedback emissions, carbon stored relatively safely until now in the surface of the planet and deep in the oceans. So there's just half a dozen of them. They're potentially all huge feedbacks. And the problem with them is, of course, they're caused by the same thing, which is global surface warming. So they're going to occur in some time scale together, a time scale enough so that they will be inter-reinforcing. They will be increasing each other as the warming increases and increases. And that's what this term runaway means. That's an environmentalist term. It goes back to the 90s. It's not a scientific term. The scientists tend to avoid this worst of all end of the planet scenarios. It's pretty scary, but you know, if you go to your doctor and you don't feel a little bit off the weather and he gives you a checkup and you go and you have your blood tests and you visit him and he just hums and haws and asks you, you know, did you have a good game of golf today and stuff like that? And he said, well, you know, what were my tests like, doctor? Oh, don't worry about that. Let me worry about it. You know, no, he's going to badger his doctor until his doctor tells him, because he wants to know how bad it is, right? That's what we all want to know. You know, how is my heart? How are my kidneys, right? Okay. He doesn't want his doctor to say, don't worry, I'll look after it. Which I'm afraid is what's happening with the climate and the planet right now. So we have unprecedented, abrupt, accelerating atmospheric carbon dioxide. So if we look at carbon dioxide alone, we have enough information to know that we're in a dire emergency and that we have to respond immediately. And that's because, of course, carbon dioxide causes the vast majority of global warming and all of the ocean acidification. Ocean acidification is accelerating. You don't have to be an expert to see from this image, this graph, that atmospheric carbon dioxide is accelerating. We should have it on a level plane. We should have had it stabilized level years ago. This is from the Scripps Oceanographic Institute, and CO2, as I mentioned, has hit 410 parts per million now. The CO2 level in the atmosphere is ocean heat. It is surface warming, and it is ocean acidification. This is the biggest, worst news that we've ever had on global climate disruption. It comes from the World Meteorological Office, and it comes from their greenhouse gas bulletin in 2017, in which they didn't mince words about what was happening to CO2. It's way higher than its 800,000-year ice core limit. That's bad enough, but the WMO said it is now increasing at a rate that has no past precedent. We're putting so many vast amounts of fossil fuel carbon into the atmosphere constantly, every second, every minute, every day. It's piling up in there. And as a result, it's astounding. When they say unprecedented, this is what they mean. It's never increased at this rate. The record goes back 40 million years now on CO2. So this is crazy stuff. What's being done is absolutely insane. Okay. Not many people realize that actually global warming is accelerating. It was confirmed in the 1.5 degrees C IPCC report, but it's really pretty obvious. So this is the global surface temperature from 1850 up to the present time, and this is from the 1.5C assessment in which they did a short-term prediction with models. So the yellow bit there is the model range, and it continues to accelerate. That's because we've got so much carbon in the atmosphere now that the scientists can predict with absolute certainty that over the next few years at least, nothing's going to change. And that means global warming is going to continue to accelerate. The oceans absorb most of the heat. This again is from the IPCC. And they absorb about 93% of all the heat that's added to the lower atmosphere by the greenhouse gases being poured in constantly. And the scientists now can show us how the heat is distributed. And the blues are all the ocean, right? Little slithers down the bottom. That's melting ice at land and the atmosphere. So because we're an ocean planet, 72% of the surface is ocean. The ocean goes down a couple of miles. It's really all ocean, right? So what happens on the land, raising the surface temperature, is really the sort of little bit that trickles out of the ocean. And we cannot afford to forget about this heat in the oceans because it's going to determine everything. Come on. Oh, I pressed the wrong button. I'm good at doing that. And ocean heat is therefore also accelerating. And I'm going to show you a few most significant research papers that just came out this month, January 2009, and this is one of them. This paper is entitled, "How Fast Are the Oceans Warming?" And you can see from very clearly that the ocean heat in the oceans is accelerating. The green line is the atmospheric carbon dioxide, which you can see is accelerating as well. And of course, behind the ocean heating is the increase in atmospheric carbon dioxide concentration. Now, I try to make this as interesting as I can, but it's not easy because it is all graphs and numbers. But we do really have to know some of these. We really do. And this is the other one we have to know. The oxygen level in the ocean is going down. And that's going down because of the ocean heat. The more heat is loaded into the ocean, the less oxygen the ocean is able to take in and distribute. So I don't have a research paper like I have for surface warming and I have for ocean heat, but I think we can say that the oxygen content is dropping at an accelerating rate. We certainly know that ocean acidification is accelerating, and that's been well published, including by the WMO, the World Meteorological Organization. And this is one of the few papers, in actual fact, shows the relative acidity and not the pH, which is normally measured. And so that's a very helpful paper, although it It was a very terrifying paper. It was led by Will Steffen, and it was called The Trajectory of the Anthropocene. Most of the sources of feedback emissions, many of you may know, are in the Arctic. We have feedbacks as well as feedback emissions, because we have the sea ice melting, and that's a big feedback because we don't have the sea ice in the summertime reflecting all the ocean energy away. We have more and more open ocean, which absorbs energy. So that's two feedbacks, actually, the sea ice and snow cover. They're about the same in strength. The one that we all pretty well know about is the permafrost feedback. Global warming is thawing permafrost. It's thawing permafrost at an accelerating rate. That's a paper that came out this month as well. And permafrost, the scientists have now discovered, has double all the carbon in the atmosphere. So we can't avoid that kicking off any further. There are shallow Arctic continental shelves, and they're the site of sub-C4 methane. Then we have the boreal forest. The boreal forest is massive. It's circumpolar. It goes all around the planet. It contains more carbon than the Amazon, and it's drying, and increasing fires are happening in the boreal. And then we have Arctic wetlands, and they're peatlands, and if you warm those up, and they're being warmed up, of course, they emit more methane. So there's another picture to give you an idea of the extent of the permafrost. And the sea ice, of course, when we lose all the summer sea ice, we're talking about millions of square miles. Add in the snow as well. The bottom line on what we have to do is this. Emissions have to be zeroed. So if you think about the carbon dioxide accelerating, so the IPCC, in its last full assessment in 2014, said that the emissions of carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide must drop to near zero. Near zero. Now, near zero, better is not good enough. Less is not good enough. Lower is not good enough. You have to totally convert, right? And so this is the science behind the fact that all fossil fuel energy must be ended and converted to 100% clean, renewable. That means everlasting energy, all of it. And we've known, many of you here have probably known for years that the studies and the magazines on science magazines and discovery have over and over published reports on solar and wind and said that we have more than enough energy, safe energy, that can replace all the renewable energy. So but this extends to the other sources of emissions, this rule of conversion, because of the science of near zero. That means a vegan diet. I think I'm probably talking to a popular audience tonight for a change when I talk about vegan diet, okay? It's a must. You can tell your friends, you've got to go vegan, you know? And that's because of the methane livestock. I'll show you a little bit on that. The other greenhouse gas is nitrous oxide. Nitrous oxide is third in the row of importance. However, it's increasing very fast. It looks like it's accelerating. And nitrous oxide is, the source of nitrous oxide is our industrial, chemical-intensive, agribusiness food production system. And so it's really wonderful that for many, many years, so many people, so many young people, almost intuitively, you know, have gotten into basically what is regenerative agriculture. Regenerative agriculture is the idea that maybe we can actually sink some carbon into the ground. Maybe we can do agriculture in a way in which we're not putting out carbon, we can put some in. Now, there are only a couple of studies. One is from China, and it's a very good one, that says, yes, we can do that. It's really going back very largely to traditional agriculture. It's very interesting. The Chinese team, and this was a field study, found that having trees was really, really important. That's nice, you know, birds and everything else. Regenerative agriculture, yeah, we can do. Our modern agriculture is a big source of carbon. And relatively easily, and this conversion is happening, we can bring a huge amount of our emissions down with a change in agriculture. There's no question about that one. I have to keep putting this in. Good news again. The year of the vegan, I just love it. But more headlines. Suddenly in the past couple of years, across my desk, I'm getting very frequent papers and comments on switching to the vegan diet. Not only for your personal health, but for the health of the planet. We have to switch to a vegan planet so we can keep a planet. No, that's not a nasty bratwurst burger. It's not difficult to be vegan now, right? Years ago, it used to be a bit tough, you know, carrot stick and a bit of celery. But we have all these great products now, great food products, and so this is all vegan. Here's David Attenborough. Now, David's really interesting because, for one thing, he's in his 90s. He's one of the most popular, successful television programmers on nature. David Suzuki in Canada would be the other one. And he was at the last climate convention in Poland. Humans need to stop eating meat to reduce climate change crises. Okay, well, why is David Attenborough interesting? Well, he's very interesting because he was a climate skeptic. So there are a number of people who genuinely just don't understand it. So really, we've not been getting it across very well. We've not been explaining it very well. But now he's in his 90s and he's come on full bore for taking on the climate emergency. Another one. This is my favorite magazine for science. It's called Science Daily. And the headline here, you see it's January 2019. Diet and food production must radically change to save the planet. So transformation of the global food system is urgently needed because there are these many reasons why our modern industrial food production system, highly successful though it is, the amount of food that the United States puts out per acre of land is phenomenal. I mean, it really is amazing, but we can't do it like that anymore, and the research suggests that we don't have to. We can produce as much food with organic and regenerative agriculture. Nitrogen fertilizers, of course, that's nitrous oxide. The Guardian is one of the papers that has been great on climate change. The Guardian has been super on climate change. The other paper in the United States is the LA Times. The LA Times has been consistently great on reporting very well all the terrible news as it comes out. And this is from a Lancet study on sustainability of the food system with respect to human health and also including planetary health. And so they've had this big report out recently that the global food system is causing an ecological and health catastrophe. So you folk and what you're doing here, you're the solution. This is really, really great, you know, and you're succeeding. Modern Western diet, ecological catastrophe. Now, this is getting a bit scientific-y, but if you're a vegan, you're really going to like looking at this. This is a study that was done back in 2016, and this is one of the studies that's led to the climate experts coming on side and saying, yep, we got to stop eating meat, and we've got to think about going vegan. See those bottom lines below, okay? That's the environmental impact with respect to the emissions, and the top one is fruit and vegetables. And then the one beneath is animal products. See animal products? Way, way, way over all the other foods with respect to its greenhouse gas emissions and its global heating and warming effect. So you see that this will show you that food production emissions are even more than industry. Can you imagine? Emissions from agriculture and what the IPCC here calls animal husbandry is more than industry emissions. Less, but more than half, I think, even of all energy emissions. So this is huge. This is absolutely huge. Animal husbandry, of course, means killing animals and eating them. But we like to put things in different language, don't we? This is the effect over 20 years. This is just part of a very important chart that the 2014 IPCC has. So for years and years, I've been saying, okay, well, how can we communicate this, in more simple terms? Well, suddenly I realized there are just two main sources of emissions. One is the one that everybody knows, that's energy, and the other one is the one that people aren't told about, which is food production. So we've got two main sources: energy and food. So here's an illustration, and there's food production on one side and power production on the other side, images of livestock, cattle, deforestation, etc., etc. Now this slide shows something else as well. The science isn't dealing with climate change in the right way. Climate change is pollution. It's pollution. It's the worst pollution we've ever had, but it's not being called pollution, and it's not being treated as pollution. It's being treated just as climate change. And there's far more in the way of impacts that the pollution from the sources of greenhouse emissions does to our population and our planet than just only the climate change. And also, it makes a huge difference to the cost of continuing to be dependent on fossil fuels. So I've written, published papers on this, and so there are the sources of greenhouse gas emissions, and neatly divided between energy production and distribution, and food production and distribution. Now, I don't want to give the impression that there's the same amount of emissions from food production as energy, but it's not that far off, actually. And there's another emission, which is black carbon soot. And so this even includes the people in India, etc. They should all be provided with solar ovens, because the poor people there are cooking their food with wood and charcoal, and that emits black carbon soot. In this part of the world, black carbon soot is mainly emitted by diesel trucks, ships, etc. And black carbon soot, the scientists have recently discovered, is second only to carbon dioxide in its contribution to warming. So actually, black carbon soot is our ace in the hole. Not enough attention is being given to this. James Hansen published a paper on it in 2020, if not earlier. And of course, tropical forest loss is accelerating. And that's another reason for going vegan, right? Because 80% of the tropical forests are being cleared for food and for pasture to rear livestock, eat meat, which does our bodies all kinds of damage, and of course is wrecking the planet. Not to mention, but we should mention, all the species and the life which is being turfed out. They're losing their homes. So this is just my image to show the agricultural source of greenhouse gas emissions, and you just have to see that all three emissions are emitted. Methane is emitted, carbon dioxide is emitted, and nitrous oxide is emitted. So agriculture is big, and that's one that we can certainly so-called fix. I follow the data. I have one of my websites is called stateofourclimate.com, and here's that EGU showing very clearly everything is accelerating. This was in 2018, that's just last year. And at the top here, you see the accelerating species extinction, which people tend to miss out when they're writing and presenting about global climate change. So everything is getting worse faster, and that means climate change and emissions and climate deniers. This is a multiple of all evils. You remember Stonewall Jackson, he made the famous Civil War statement that war is the sum of all evils, and war is, and that's a major reason. War and preparation for war is a major reason why we're not getting a handle on carbon dioxide emissions. But to describe, to take a leaf from his book, climate disruption is the multiple of all evils. It's a great multiplier. So we've got CO2 accelerating faster and faster, global warming is accelerating, ocean heat and ocean acidification are accelerating. Now literally this is a death sentence. This literally is a death sentence to our planet and our future. This is a relatively simple one. This is accelerating sea level rise. This is a study which is published that proved that sea level rise is accelerating. It's a great indicator. Global surface warming is not a good indicator. It sounds very complicated, and actually it is. It's not a good indicator of what we're doing to our climate. Sea level rise is, quite simply, because sea level rise is due to two things. It's due to the heat that goes into the ocean, and most of the greenhouse gas heat is going into the ocean. Heat expands water, so the ocean level rises. So that's a very good direct indicator. And the other reason for sea level rise is the melting of the glaciers on land. So we couldn't really actually have a better indicator than sea level rise, because it gives us both the direct impact of the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere and the indirect impact of their effect on the planet in the form of melting the glaciers. Have to mention this. We're being put on a suicidal policy. We've all been put on death row by our governments, by our leaders who are working for the fossil fuel corporations and do not act in our interest any longer. We've been known for a long, long time, I mentioned it earlier on, that global emissions have to decline by 2020. This has been published by every single intergovernmental organization, not only the IPCC, but from UNEP, from the OECD, from the World Bank, from International Energy Agency. They've all shown for at least 5 years charts like this, showing the global emissions of carbon dioxide increase at an accelerating rate in the black, and then at 2020, both for 2 degrees C and for 1.5 degrees C, emissions have to come down. Give it a year. Give it your best year. If everybody does a little, talks about it, writes about it, talks about it, write about it, we're on the tipping point. With the vegan diet aspect, we are definitely on the tipping point. Okay, the doomsday clock is another bit of news. January this month has been advanced to 2 minutes to midnight. This doomsday clock has been going since the days of the nuclear arms race with the USSR and the big threat of nuclear annihilation. Now they put it to 2 minutes to midnight because of climate change and nuclear weaponry again. And the only other time it's been at 2 minutes was back in 1953. And that was because of the real threat, the fear of that I and some of you remember very well. So this was a very, very important report. The report by the IPCC published in October 2018 on the 1.5 degree C limit, and it confirmed in no uncertain terms that that is the danger limit. 1.5 C is going to be disastrous. But 2 degrees C is absolute total catastrophe. So it is a great advance and good news that the scientists are completely behind the 1.5 degree C limit. It's also very good news that this report told us that emissions had to be cut from by 45% from 2010 by 2030. So from now we have to cut emissions of carbon dioxide 50% by 2030. That is not hard to do. We have renewable energy, technology, and science coming out of our ears. The other really good statement that came out of the IPCC was that this means rapid, far-reaching, and unprecedented changes in all aspects of society. Everything has to be converted. Everything has to be converted. The world has to be rebuilt, right? The entire world has to be rebuilt for clean, non-polluting, everlasting energy. Now think about that. If that happens, that's a golden age for humanity, right? Unlimited safe energy. And the more you make, the cheaper and better it gets. And the more people buy, the cheaper it gets to buy. Which is why the fossil fuel industry have this evil campaign of forcing us to stay dependent on fossil fuel energy. But the truth, the terrible truth, is out with the IPCC report. This headline says, "Terrifying climate change warning, 12 years until we're doomed." The 12 years is a bit misleading. We've got 1 year to get us on the survival scenario where we need to be in 12 years. But hey, look where I got this from, Fox News. I mean, when Fox News puts out a headline like this about climate change, I think we're beginning to win. They got it from the New York Times, and they repeated this rapid, far-reaching, unprecedented changes. So emissions of carbon dioxide are increasing, and there's been a huge increase last year, 2.7%. And this is because governments are continuing to write off our future by subsidizing the fossil fuel industry with vast amounts of money. And it happens in all countries. It's widespread. The definitive study was done by the International Monetary Fund of all agencies in 2015. So a 2% increase is huge, right, in 1 year. And as I say, consider that carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is global heat, and it is ocean acidification. So this has to come down, and it can come down relatively easy, except this is Exxon's idea of an energy outlook. It's an idea that will end the future. So Exxon 2016 and then 2040, substantially more fossil fuels being burnt. And then Exxon has a little section in which it says it cares about, you know, climate and everything. Oh, no. Exxon is destroying the climate and destroying the planet. We all depend on our health and our very survival on the climate. All of us, you know, animals, birds, fish, human beings, all of us. So I put the survival scenario down there, which you've already seen. So January 2019, CO2 hit 410 parts per million for the first time. 410, there it is. That's obviously accelerating from 1960. It's very, very obvious. The 800,000 year limit of carbon dioxide was 300 parts per million. So this is more than a third higher. It's something like 37% higher. It's insane. It's absolutely insane. And This is really hard to believe, but it comes from the World Meteorological Organization. I checked with my colleague in Australia, Andrew Glickson, a paleoclimatologist, and he said, oh yes. He said, the atmospheric carbon dioxide is accelerating so fast, it's never ever in the history of the atmosphere increased at this rate. That's the 800,000-year ice core data. You can see where we are on CO2, way above that 800,000-year limit. You know, each of these things you can take, any of them, and you know that we're in a dire emergency, right? You can look at the 800,000-year ice core on CO2. You can look at the CO2 from 1750, and the message is the same. What I'm trying to do is present it over and over and over, so that I'm trying to hit the corporations and the politicians on the head is what I'm trying to do, over and over and over, right? You got to stop doing this, you guys. This is crazy. It's evil. Now, there was a particular demonstration of criminal evil at the last climate conference in Poland. The media were on it right away. We had Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Russia, and the United States sabotaging that conference. What they did was that the reports by the IPCC, one of the great strengths of those reports are that they're examined and agreed to by every world government. They're not just agreed to by the scientists. So they are totally authoritative. Every single government in the world examines and approves of the reports. So that report had been approved. But these damn countries, oil producers, blocked it being filed, being tabled at the conference, which is outrageous in the extreme. And that proves they're planet killers. That proves they're planet killers. It really, really does. And it also proves that they have no intention of doing anything to slow down emissions. The investment banks and the fossil fuel corporations, Michael Mann very appropriately said, the new axis of evil, I stand with him on that one. What they're doing is planning to burn every last bit of fossil fuel that they can get. It's complete criminal insanity. I know that James Hansen, over some years ago, suspected that this was going on, you know, and unfortunately, he's been proved right now. So that's just my comment on these mad power leaders destroying our sacred earth. This earth is sacred. Every single organized religion recognizes in its scriptures that earth is sacred. That's true. It's a fact. Patriarch Bartholomew of the Eastern Orthodox Church and now Pope Francis of the Catholic Church, they both made statements over and over that continuing with climate change is a sin against God and it's a great evil. Extreme heat. Australia right now is the hottest place on the planet. We're looking at from inconvenient truth to painful truth. It is hell in Australia right now. On their Australia Day, which is the day before yesterday or something, 6 degrees hotter than the same day last year. And you see I've put Australia's hottest January on record again. Every couple of years, Australia is looking like that at this time of year in their summer, and another record. Animals are dying all over the place. Cattle, Australia's maybe towards the end of a multi-year drought as well. So there's temperatures, and it practically got to 50 degrees C in Australia. So you can see that whole Australian continent practically baking. This is the research that shows accelerating ocean heat that I've shown you before. Very, very important, because this is what causes ocean deoxygenation, as well, of course, as contributing towards the death of the coral reefs. Going back to Australia and the Great Barrier Reef, we've lost the Great Barrier Reef. We've lost all the warm water coral reefs. And it's something to grieve over, and it's something to tell people, how much more do we want to lose? How much more do we want to lose? How much more do you want to allow your leaders, your politicians, your corrupt politicians and governments to get away with, right? And leave our children, all today's children, with a planet not worth living in, frankly. Be so damaged, so wrecked. This year, also, research, both ice sheets are melting at an accelerating rate. There's the Greenland ice sheet on the top, and there's the Antarctic ice sheet on the bottom. I can now say everything is accelerating. I couldn't quite say that before because I hadn't got this Antarctic ice sheet data. Greenland, it's melting, losing ice 4 times faster in the past 15 years. Antarctic, 6 times faster in the past 40 years. If this doesn't show that we are in a dire emergency, nothing does, but the fact is everything shows we're in a dire emergency. And we're in a dire Earth emergency because climate disruption and ocean disruption is impacting on top of the 6th mass extinction, which we've known about for years, and which is accelerating. So just doing a climate change assessment by itself, you have to take everything in. You have to do a holistic environmental health assessment. You have to take in the whole planet, okay? Because climate disruption has just started to increase the rate of extinction of the 6 mass extinctions, just started to do that. The paper in 2007 that got some publicity from the 4th assessment report said that by mid-century, assuming that the deforestation continued at the same rate, by mid-century, climate change will be the leading cause of species extinction. And that's just horrific to even consider. So when we talk about climate disruption, we always need to link it with the 6th mass extinction. As it is, we're leaving our children with a greatly impoverished planet. Now, if we give the planet a chance, it'll come back, you know, hundreds of years, but it will. So we have to give the planet a chance. We have to give our children a chance, and our politicians and the corporations and the investment banks, they're waging a war against us is what they're doing. Right? They're waging a war against the future. And people are starting to fight back. January report, a bird that was now recorded as extinct, sweet little bird, Hawaiian songbird on Maui. You know, we don't have to lose these creatures. We just don't have to. The awful thing is, and I published a paper on this a couple of years ago, is that climate disruption accelerates the extinction, and the extinction from ecosystem integrity loss and loss of biodiversity increases climate disruption. So these 2 catastrophic impacts hit on each other and make each other even worse. So they're going to accelerate both of those catastrophic situations faster. Annihilation is what the biodiversity scientists are calling it. There's 2 papers out now saying that we have an annihilating situation. This is the most recent one in 2018. Co-extinctions annihilate planetary life. I just want to read a little bit from the abstract. Climate change and human activity are dooming species at an unprecedented rate via a plethora of often synergistic mechanisms, make each other worse. Among these primary extinctions of single species driven by environmental change is almost certainly just the tip of an extinction iceberg. Wrong one. Okay, I hope I've proved the point. We're in an Earth emergency. We're in an Earth emergency. What do we do when there's a medical emergency? We press a button, everybody rushes, right? We got a great system now for medical emergencies. It's absolutely superb, right? All the resources are focused on the one patient. All the staff are focused on the one patient. I've been here many times. And in my career, we've been getting better and better and better and better at this. You know, we're saving more and more and more lives. Lives that, you know, just 15 years ago, we would have said, no, sorry, there's no way your son can make it, or something like that. We got to do this for the planet, for Christ's sake, right? We're not doing anything for the planet. We're doing our leaders and those responsible for looking after us. Yeah, okay, they're all right on this, but they're doing nothing, worse than nothing for the planet. This is the IPCC, which I've explained. So climate change and health. Healthy people, healthy planet, healthy people. We don't get to survive unless we put the planet in decent shape. It's that simple. Now, here's the interesting thing that many of you are aware of, because I think I remember one of the presenters actually referring to it. It's good news. Measures for the healthiest human population possible are also the imperatives to preserve a habitable planet Earth. Right? So if we become kind, right, and treat everybody, you know, as having the right to life, you know, wherever you live, and we can do this, and provide the best health care possible and the best lifestyle health possible, we're actually getting the same results as if we get rid of fossil fuels, because you got the same list. It's absolutely amazing. You've heard all about the chronic degenerative diseases caused by our high chemical, you know, processed food diet. I thought I had an image. The thing about air pollution is that, and I've been involved in this research going way back, the tiny particles from fossil fuel emissions gets into the bottom of the lungs, gets in the alveoli, and goes straight into the bloodstream. So air pollution is not like other pollutants. It doesn't go through the stomach and the liver, etc. It gets straight to every organ in the body. And of course, those fossil fuel pollutants are loaded with toxins, right? Paramagnetic hydrocarbons and heavy metals and the whole lot, right? So it's not surprising that as the research into air pollution, which is fossil fuel, increases and makes further progress, then it's even linked strongly with diabetes now. Air pollution is linked strongly with diabetes. So you've got a long list. It's just amazing. And those researchers, by the way, great work. So how long have we known about all the health effects? This is accountability. This is why I'm putting this image up. How long have we known of all the health impacts of global climate disruption? Since 1995. 1995. And I can show you a similar chart like from the last IPCC assessment. It's identical with this chart. In 1995, the IPCC scientists hit on every single impact on population health. This is one of my favorite ones. It's from New South Wales. So if you want a really good, this is really good illustration chart of the impacts of environmental health impacts, right, of climate change. Environmental health impacts takes in air quality, takes in water quality, takes in food quality, okay? And they've really got it all together. It's very, very nice. Tragically, we've known forever that the most vulnerable population, we call it subpopulation, to global climate disruption, are children. Not only that, children are most vulnerable to every single adverse impact of climate change. And that's no matter where they live. They do the worst, which really does make this evil. Oh, that was World Health Organization quote from 2016. Here's a paper that goes back to 2007. I'm switching between recent papers and papers that go back years ago, just to demonstrate how long this has been firmly established, how long governments have known about this. So this was a Committee on Environmental Health and the Effects of Global Climate Change on the Health of Children and all those many impacts on children that I just mentioned. Oh, that was the image that I thought I was going to use. So this shows that death by fossil fuels. So fossil fuels kill us every day by air pollution, toxic air pollution. I'm talking millions of deaths every year. Millions. Probably, according to the World Health Organization, 4 million people around the world every year are being killed by fossil fuel air pollution. In comparison, the greenhouse gases is actually very small, but it's hundreds of thousands already. And there was a paper just published last week by a scientist in the UK that said we really are underestimating the number of people that are being killed by climate change. But here's the thing, global warming increases air pollution. So, all the time we're burning fossil fuels, those fossil fuel corporations and our leaders are killing millions of people, and all the time they're digging up more fossil fuels, they will be killing more and more and more at a higher and higher, faster rate because global warming increases air pollution. This is the devastating 1.5 degrees C report. This is one chart. Water scarcity, up to 1 billion more people water stressed, 1.5 C. Up to 3 billion at 2 degrees C. Ecosystems, coral reefs, they're doomed. They've been destroyed. Not by us. They've been destroyed by the fossil fuel corporations, by the investment banks, and by our corrupt leaders. And 99% of coral reefs at 2%, 70 to 90% of 1.5. We've known for years, I've known for over 10 years, that at 1.5 degrees C, the coral reefs wouldn't survive. And then they get acidified on top of that, so they're gone. And that is it's a cosmic tragedy is sort of the only way to look at it. Coastal cities, 69 million people flooding, 79 people at 2 degrees C. Food systems, listen to this, people. 32 to 36 million more people exposed to lower crop yields at 1.5 degrees C. We cannot avoid 1.5 degrees C. 10 times that amount at 2 degrees C. This is the conservative IPCC. 330 to 396 million more people will have declining yields of their crops. And I've got more data on that. And then the health, malaria. The IPCC has finally come down on the side and stated that malaria is going to be increased by global warming. And malaria, of course, is the biggest killer in the world, particularly of children, again. In 2015, 212 million malaria cases, 430,000 deaths. And at 1.5 degrees, that's going to be more, and at 2 degrees, that's going to be more. Heat waves, up to 4.5 billion at 1.5 degrees C, suffering under heat waves like poor Australia is at the moment, up to 6.7 billion people at 2 degrees C. So thank goodness that the scientists in the IPCC, I wish they'd done it years ago, have now come strongly on side of giving our best to limit it to 1.5 degrees C. So I'm not going to go through individual solutions, but an approach to solutions. This was a German advisory council report, it's a long report, Climate Protection as a World Citizen Movement. That's a great idea. That's like climate mobilization, and that's what excellent group in the United States is doing. The climate mobilization, their group is called, and they're starting this, and then there's another similar group and action starting in the UK, which is spreading. Many groups in the States already, called Extinction Rebellion. Extinction Rebellion. You don't want your extinction, thank you very much. This is excellent news. This is the World Economic Forum. All the big money people, high-profile people meet every year in Davos, Switzerland, and every year they have hundreds of experts. Also, they go in the communities and they question people to establish the risks. These are business risks. The risks for the world over the next 10 years. Changing climate on top, right on top. It's been similar for the past 3 years, and they produced these really good graphs this year in which you see all the connections, extreme weather events, water crises, food crises, biodiversity loss. They did a great job. Well, of course, they got the money. They can do it, right? Another bit of good news, I certainly think, is Leonardo DiCaprio Foundation has got together with a few climate scientists, and they've run the models, and they say, which they call their One Earth Model project, and they say, we can make 1.5 degrees C just. But I have to say back to them, and they have this on their graph, global emissions have to go down in a year. In a year. There's their nice graph. We need a zero combustion world economy. To make it simple and not get into the complicated discussions about how much and what we can burn. Years ago, I was doing the zero carbon science, and my wife was looking over my shoulder and she says, "Ah, the burning age is over, Peter." Oh my God, I said, yeah. So there's no better way to put it. The burning age is over. The burning age is over. The solar age is going to replace the whole thing. And the future for humanity would be beyond our greatest dreams. Really. Getting rid of fossil fuels. All clean, renewable energy. Really. And they worked out that we can get to 100% renewables by 2050. Even better, if we add in black carbon soot that they didn't have, which is second only to CO2, and we add in methane and we add in nitrous oxide, even easier to do. So now I come to emissions from food production. So here are the agricultural sources, all three greenhouse gases. That's today's fire map. All of those huge expansions of fire are fires intentionally set for agriculture, with a massive amount of carbon dioxide and black carbon soot, the two #1 global heating emissions. We're burning up the planet, right? We need a big educational program, right, to educate the people who don't know any better. Literally, they don't know any better. To educate the people into that you don't have to burn down the land in order to do agriculture, particularly if you're doing regenerative agriculture. You want that wood. You want that stuff, right? Look at China, you know. Australia, in the heat wave, fires breaking out all over. If you look right up north, right up to the top of the map, in Siberia, you'll see a lot of rather big fires. That's the boreal forest burning. That's a potential very big source of carbon feedback emissions. So that's very bad. So the climate emergency is getting recognized. Oh, great. London, UK. When London, UK declares a climate emergency, I think we're getting there. Climate mobilization, go to the website. They have a long list now of municipalities in the world who have declared the climate emergency and have started a climate emergency program or a climate emergency department or a climate emergency commissioner, okay? Oh, that's a shame. I promised to give you the list of American cities. I forgot, I'm sorry. This is, I've referred to this in passing, we cannot safeguard the planet without peace and disarmament. It's impossible. So we roll in to the best golden age of renewable age possible. We roll in, it has to be the peace and disarmament age. We have to stop these idiot, crazy leaders. I mean, like, they're worse than children, far worse. Crazy. So this is very nice. This is a little conference that the University of Victoria, where I'm from, had. Look at, oh God, $1.7 trillion a year being spent on armaments. And we have our leaders saying, we'd like to deal with climate change, but you know, it's so expensive, we can't afford it. They're lying through their teeth in the first place, because all the recent studies, including by the World Bank, show, of course, that mitigating, stopping climate change is a huge profit. When you rebuild the world for renewable energy, that's a huge economic profit, right? And world total employment as well. United States, of course, still in the lead. $600 billion a year. Oh my God. So we come now to what can we do about the global emergency. Number one, work with your municipal governments, right? They're totally ready. Vancouver and Victoria, where I'm from, have already agreed that they're going to have an emergency resolution, and they're going to put an emergency climate action plan. Here's the University of Illinois that did it some years ago, and a climate change action plan. But they're all emergency plans now. So what can we do? Conversion, conversion, conversion. So I have to start with a quote from Pope Benedict in 2012, in which he said, what we need is ecological conversion. Right on, Pope. Number one, talk about it and write about it. Break through this psychological denial, right? That it's uncomfortable, that we can't just think about it. Come on, people. This is the biggest thing our species has ever faced. I think our species has been around for over 1 million years. Homo erectus. We've been here a long, long time. I mean, we have survived and prevailed over all kinds of things. We can beat this thing. Energetically support the IPCC with their 1.5 degree C limit. I was over in, I was invited to give a panel presentation at The Hague, International Criminal Court, a month ago. And I did the Hague Court, and then they'd put on a public group. It was wonderful. It was packed packed with young people. It was a huge place. It was absolutely packed. And so they really did inspire me. And so at the end I said, look, arm yourself with this science. Arm yourself with this science and go forward, and you beat your leaders, right? So that's what we got to do. We got to wage peace. Wage peace. It's got to come in fashion again. And be kind and go vegan. We got to veganize the planet is what we've got to do, and it's on the way. It's on the way. Reinvest. Make good money. I'm proof. I'm not an incredibly wealthy guy, but over the years I've put all my savings and investments, all of them, into renewable energy. Hey, they're making money very well. You know, feels good. And tell this to the pension funds. This is ridiculous. Pension funds, write to them. Say, hey, reinvest. And the big banks, reinvest. Tell them. Demand that your government stop subsidizing fossil fuels. You tell your governments, this is the worst crime ever. Your legacy will stink. Tell them. Now, the 3 R's are still fundamental in dealing with climate change. Reduce, reuse, recycle. Be a local. Enjoy staying close to home. A lot of people are doing these things, and a lot of young people, which is very encouraging. Use your legs, particularly old guys like me. Walk, keep walking. You heard about this yesterday. Public transport. You know, we need a lot more public transport. It makes our cities way better. The EGU is at Vienna. Vienna is a beautiful city. They have a great public transport system. It's dirt cheap. There's hardly any traffic in Vienna. You can wander all over the place. It's great. Final one. Earth pride. Earth pride. Do this and feel proud of yourself. And feel proud of yourself for the earth. I think earth pride is a nice idea. A friend of mine in the States, we were talking about it. And remember to support your indigenous people, to support your native people. And in Canada, like in the United States, those people are in the forefront. They know, they get this. Intuitively they know. It's in their heart and in their bones. They know how wrong this is. And they're out there doing their utmost to stop the insanity. South Pacific Islands, of course, sea level rise, we've seen this already, it's accelerating. This is a terrible, terrible crime. Huh? These people have lived it for ages. They don't want to leave. They love their life. And we love tropical islands and we fly there, right? Sorry?
It's even worse underwater.
Correct. Good point. That's right. That's right. And they get these much worse storms because of climate change, which is damaging their beaches and their agriculture. It's making it very difficult for them to get their provisions by boat. Climate change is really hammering these people. This month in Indonesia, massive evacuations. Thousands of people forced to evacuate their homes after heavy rain triggered devastating floods and landslides. Look at that. This is happening frequently, all over the world. The thing also about heavy storms and floods, it's the other cause of land degradation and loss of topsoil. It's not just wind and drought. It's floods as well. You lose topsoil. We can't afford to lose any more topsoil. We know that. There's the ice sheets, just a reminder. Reminder. Okay, this is the big one. Our leaders, and you may have got the impression I'm not very impressed by them, our leaders have condemned us to a 3 degrees C warming by 2100, which after 2100 will continue and it'll be at least 5 degrees C. So this one here is a calculation by Climate Action Tracker backed by climate experts. What they do is a great service. They work out at least 2 or 3 times a year what the best national emissions targets would lead us to. And it's 3 degrees C by 2100. At 3 degrees C, we have known for years all crops in all major food-producing regions are declined. They will have declined below today's baseline level. That's 3 degrees C. And they got the nerve to actually, have this published. Oh, anything over 2 degrees C is runaway anyway. That's the combined national emissions targets. 3 degrees, it's going to be higher with feedbacks. That doesn't include feedbacks, so it's worse. Now, unfortunately, the early models on crop yields were naive, and they gave people in the northern hemisphere, particularly the United States, the impression that the United States could weather global climate change and even benefit. That's not true. The United States is highly vulnerable to climate change, and that's really bad because I mentioned. Time's up. Okay. The United States is vulnerable to global climate change. Is a perfect place for me to finish. Thanks so much for coming out. Thanks so much for listening to this terrible truth.